Okay, wonderful. We have quite a few people that have joined us, and I think we can go ahead and begin. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today for the What Works for Foundational Learning in Emergencies webinar. We're really excited to share all of this new and important research with you. Next slide, please. So just to begin with some welcome and housekeeping notes, I want to flag for our audience here today that we do have French interpretation available. Please find the interpretation globe icon on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and opt into French if that's your preference. We also welcome your questions. On that same toolbar, you will see a Q&A box where you can ask your questions at any time for any panelist, and we look forward to hearing from you as we've reserved quite a chunk of time towards the end for Q&A, and your questions will be an important part of the discussion. And finally, we encourage you to say hello, introduce yourself, and connect with other colleagues in the chat. We're really excited to have you all here. Next slide, please. Just to give you a quick overview of what we will be talking about today, we will start with a presentation by Dr. Silvia Diaz-Granados from the ERIC research program, who will give us a really high-level overview of the existing evidence to answer the question of what works to improve foundational learning in emergency contexts, for whom, at what cost, and under what circumstances. And then from that broad overview, we sort of start to zero in on specific interventions. So our second presentation will be by Dr. Caitlin Collis and Dr. Hassan Ahmad Hassan from the Luminos Fund, who will speak about the latest evidence from their work in accelerated education programming. Our third by Dr. Karen Levesque and Dr. Jacqueline Ngumia from Imagine Worldwide, who will give us the latest evidence on EdTech for supplemental education in refugee camps. And finally, we'll have Colin Crossley from Youth Impact giving us a presentation on phone-based tutoring as an intervention for continuing learning during emergencies. To tie it all together and to synthesize the key learnings from these presentations, we will have Deborah Graben, an evidence and learning expert who will lead the discussion and Q&A section of the webinar. Next slide, please. Just before I hand off to our first speaker to frame the objectives of the webinar for you today, our first objective is to present synthesized insights from the latest research on effectiveness and impact of EIE interventions on foundational skills in conflict and crisis settings. And our second objective is to offer tangible guidance for donors, policymakers, and practitioners in implementing these interventions that are shown to be cost-effective by research. With that, I would like to hand over to Dr. Sylvia from the ERIC program, who will take us through the evidence, the global evidence review that has been conducted.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And can you see my screen? I'm trying to share my screen. How do I make this? Sorry. Okay. Can you see now the entire screen? Can you see it?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Sylvia.
Okay, great. So thanks, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Silvia Diaz-Granados. I'm the Director of Research in Education at the International Rescue Committee and the co-director of a research program that is the Education Research in Conflict and Protracted Crisis Program. It's an FCDO-funded multi-year, multi-country research consortium that is really trying to expand and strengthen the evidence base for education in crisis, in conflict and crisis settings, to really inform policy and practice in these settings. And so, as you know, there is a learning crisis in the world. There's 224 million school-age children affected by crisis globally. 72 million of these children are out of school. 127 million, which is 50% of that population, are in school, but they're not achieving minimum proficiency levels in reading and math. And then because of these, it's very important to generate evidence on what works to improve academic learning, as well as social emotional skills and well-being. But in this specific presentation, I'm going to focus on foundational skills, literacy, and numeracy. And so basically, because of how the learning crisis that exists more than ever, it's important to generate evidence on what works, how, for whom, at what cost, and under what conditions. Specifically in the midst of all the cuts to foreign aid, having evidence on cost-effective programs is more needed than ever. We know that the gap between available funding and resources needed to meet the urgent humanitarian needs has skyrocketed, forcing organizations to do more with less. And so it's important really to understand and to try to maximize how to invest every dollar in ways that actually move the needle and improve learning outcomes. So for that reason, we have conducted a study as part of the ERIC program to try to identify what education interventions are being implemented in conflict-affected settings, for which of those there's actually rigorous evidence of impact. We want to also understand what then is the impact of these different types of education interventions on the holistic learning outcomes of children, literacy, numeracy, social, emotional learning, and well-being of school-age children in this protracted crisis. In this particular presentation, I'm going to only focus on literacy and numeracy, but we will have additional webinars, INE webinars exploring SEL and well-being. And we also want to know what evidence then exists about the cost effectiveness of these education interventions in conflict and crisis settings. So in order to generate this evidence, what we have conducted is a comprehensive evidence review. We, first of all, built on the systematic evidence reviews conducted by Dana Birdie in education in context of forced displacement. And so basically we started with all the studies that she had identified. Sorry, I didn't put here the citation, but this is a study in 2023. In addition to those, we added all of the evidence from 7 country-level systematic reviews that ERIC conducted in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Nigeria, and South Sudan. And in addition to that, we conducted specific searches in websites of organizations that we know are conducting research in conflict and crisis settings. So after having the studies, basically the studies that we ended up including are studies that are conducted with school-age children. We have a separate review for ECD populations in conflict-affected settings. We only included studies that use causal inference research, and by that I mean experimental or quasi-experimental research designs. For the particular presentation today, we only included studies looking at foundational learning, literacy, and numeracy skills, but we have separate meta-analysis for SEL, social emotional learning and well-being, as well as separate meta-analysis for looking at the effect of interventions on access, enrollment, and attainment. The papers included are from the last 25 years, 2000 to 2024, and it's really only including papers that have been written in English. Once we had, and I will discuss a little more, but once we have these papers, then we conducted meta-analysis, which is a method that combines the results of multiple impact evaluations to estimate the overall impact of education interventions implemented in these settings on the specific literacy and numeracy outcomes. Meta-analysis is a type of analysis that accounts for sample size, standard errors of each study, and that assigns different weights to the studies according to these parameters to estimate the overall impacts that different types of interventions have on the outcomes that we care about. In addition to that, we also looked at, for those studies, in addition to the impact, we wanted to identify the cost effectiveness. So we looked at whether the studies report and have data on the cost per child, and we converted the data to the exchange rate of 2023 and estimated the cost per change in outcome, literacy or numeracy outcomes for every $100 spent. Happy to discuss more later. But so basically, this is quickly looking, this is where we started with the studies identified by Dana Birdie, the additional studies that we added with Eric, the additional studies that we looked at, looking at additional websites, the total study screen, the ones that were excluded given that they were maybe not using experimental, quasi-experimental methods, the ones that were assessed for eligibility, and the final studies that we included in this specific report. So what did we find? What education interventions for school-age children have rigorous evidence of impact on academic outcomes in conflict and crisis settings? So the first is we observed different variations of teacher professional development models, including face-to-face trainings, teaching learning circles, and coaching. We also found studies that looked at the impact of provision of reading materials or incentives to use reading and learning reading materials mostly. We found studies looking at the impact of remedial lessons on low performers. We found studies looking at the impact of sending text messages and phone calls. Studies looking at the impact of providing software with academic games for personalized learning, IVR automatic calls, remote teaching to the right level. So teaching to the right level, but remotely, using during times of COVID, online formative assessments, social emotional learning programming, and accelerated learning programs. So there may be a lot more interventions for school-age children implemented in conflict and crisis settings, but these are the interventions for which there's rigorous evidence of impact in this setting, so using experimental, quasi-experimental design studies. I'm happy to discuss the specifics of each of these, but I'm going to basically go directly. We know that these different interventions, they're basically different. They're different uses, and so we then categorize the interventions according to the needs. So there may be interventions that are good for children who are enrolled in formal school or for children who are completely out of school. And within those, there are types of interventions that are system strengthening interventions that are trying to improve the education quality for all children who are in school. And among those, we have the teacher professional development interventions, the provision or incentives to use reading materials, and social emotional learning programming. We have interventions that are used as supplemental learning for children who sometimes are low performance or sometimes for everyone, but as supplemental learning after school. Among those, we have software for personalized learning. We have remedial lessons, social emotional learning programming, and again, provision or incentives to use reading materials at home. We found interventions that are used in the context of when there's a temporary disruptions of school learning because perhaps a COVID or a pandemic or some other closures. Among those, we also find software with academic games, the text messages with phone calls. We found remote teaching to the right level, online assessments, and the IVR automatic calls. And we have interventions with rigorous evidence of impact for improving the learning outcomes of out-of-school children. We only found evidence of experimental, quasi-experimental studies for accelerated learning programs. So when we look at the meta-analysis, this is what we found. And so these are the results of the meta-analysis, the impact of education interventions on literacy skills. And so what you find here is that here are organizing this is the specific study, and this is the subgroup will show you the average of impact for a specific study across different types of interventions. So here for literacy outcomes, we found 8 interventions that have evidence of impact. We find that across all of interventions, the education interventions, the average impact is 0.16 standard deviations, which according to not Cohen estimates, but Matthew Kraft's estimates, this would basically reflect a medium-size impact. And then you see that the highest one is remote digital teaching at the right level, then online formative students assessments, software with academic games for personalized learning, academic learning program. This particular study doesn't include the Luminous because this was conducted before the Luminous study that will be presented today was conducted. Provision of reading and learning materials, and so these are all positive, and then they start decreasing to having sometimes null impact or even sometimes negative impact. We observed that the ones that are here, so here you can observe basically the effect size across studies, 0.45. This is considered large. This is also considered large. This is large. This is large. This is now considered between large and medium, and then these are smaller. This is what we find for what works to improve math skills or numeracy skills. We find 10 interventions that have impact on outcomes. The average intervention basically have an impact of 0.16 standard deviations, which is considered to be medium. We find here that software for academic games for personalized learning across different studies, we find an average impact of 0.42 standard deviations. This is considered large impact. And then after that, we see other programs, accelerated learning, phone calls plus text messages. This one, sorry, I forgot to change. This is not tutoring. I'm calling it now remedial lessons, social emotional learning, and there's others, but basically some even have null or even negative impact. Once we look at what evidence exists for cost efficiency, this is basically not all of the interventions that are for which there's evidence of impact have evidence of cost. And so sometimes you really need to look at the impact, but also consider the cost. And so these are the interventions which report evidence of the cost. And so you see here, for example, that the phone calls plus text messages is just $12 per child. Then there's other, the ALP program is 106. Oh, but by the way, all of these, just to make them, to put them on the same scale, according to the years, they were all converted to exchange to the rates of 2023. And so here you see the cost of different interventions. You see here the remedial classes, social emotional learning, just for the different studies, what is the cost? In the case of Levesque et al., the cost of the software with academic games for personalized learning, the cost of these types of interventions really vary greatly according to the scale and how many years it's implemented. So the cost can range from within 5 years, it can be, and Karen will talk about that, but it can be from $5 were implemented at scale, and the cost of these tablets and the program used over several different children, to even up to $300 per child when it's implemented with just a few children in a very small scale. So the cost really varies greatly according to the conditions of implementation. So this is the cost per child, but then we want to combine the information from cost with the information of impact. And so basically, once we look at cost effectiveness, which is basically what is the effect size that we can observe per $100 in spending, you can see here in blue, the numeracy, the impacts on numeracy per $100 spent and the impacts on literacy. And so, for example, you see here that this intervention, which has a relatively small effect size, but it's also very inexpensive. Once you account what you look at a cost effectiveness, you see that sending text messages and conducting phone calls actually has a very good, meaningful effect size on the numeracy skills of children, 1.66 standard deviations. That's pretty impressive. And then you have other interventions, for example, providing reading and learning materials. This is once you combine the impact with the cost, you actually can observe that the impact in this case on reading literacy outcomes can be pretty significant. And then we have, sorry, I don't know if this is showing. Okay, then we have the very impressive software with academic learning, where the impact, which is already a large impact, once you account for the cost, it can be, in the case of literacy skills, it can be as small as not small, this is extremely large, 6.2 standard deviations per $100 spent to 10 standard deviations once you do it at scale. And in the case of numeracy outcomes, it can be as small as 0.15 standard deviations all the way to 0.84. So in this table, I'm trying to account for the strength of the evidence, because in some cases you actually have several different interventions, and so you have when we categorize here something that has perhaps strong evidence of cost effectiveness is because you have more than one impact evaluation that shows impact, whether it's on literacy or numeracy outcomes, and you also have information on cost, and so those are ones that we're categorizing as strong evidence. Then you have promising evidence of cost effectiveness. These are interventions for which there's maybe one single impact evaluation, and there's also evidence on cost, and they seem promising. In the case of ALPs, we know now, and Luminous will tell us, so there will be at least 2 impact evaluations in conflict affected settings, but when this was done, there was only one. So we can assume that ALP could move up in the future. There's also interventions for which there's promised evidence of impact, but there's not costing data. And so among those, you have things as teaching to the right level. The evidence for teaching to the right level is very solid in stable settings, but it's not in conflict and protracted crisis settings. And you have things like online student assessments, IVR calls. We have some interventions for which the evidence is null or mixed. And then we have interventions such as LCL programming, where maybe even if there's a positive impact in some cases, or sometimes there's like null impact, once you look at combine the impact with the cost, we find that there's emerging evidence of low cost effectiveness. In the case of LCL programming, when we look at the specifics, a lot seems to be that the interventions that have been implemented are sometimes they have a high cost per child, and then the impact is sometimes null or sometimes reduced because the interventions seem to have not been designed in ways that result in high uptake, or in interventions that are seen as aligned with the needs of the community. And so these red flags that it would be important to consider and redesign social emotional learning programs to reduce the cost and improve effectiveness. So in terms of what works according to different needs, this basically we suggest that if in the case of wanting to improve, education for everyone, we know that or there seems to be good evidence that providing reading materials, whether it's providing or giving incentives to use reading materials, can increase literacy outcomes. Coaching can as well increase literacy outcomes. In the case of when schools are closed, phone calls plus text messages can improve numeracy outcomes. Remote teaching to the right level can improve literacy outcomes. In the case of when the need is to improve provide supplemental learning for low performance, there's good evidence that software with academic games and also provision of incentives to use reading and learning materials work at home. And for out-of-school children, there's promising evidence that accelerated learning programs are cost effective. In terms of conclusions, we have two interventions that have good evidence of cost effectiveness. Software with academic games for personalized learning is highly impactful for literacy and numeracy outcomes, but there's conditions for cost effectiveness, which is that the implementation really needs to take place at scale and over a few years. Otherwise, the cost can be very high, and so it could be not cost effective. So those are conditions for implementation. In the case of phone calls and text, these are cost effective for numeracy outcomes during times of school disruption, and potentially for other circumstances or under other conditions, it could be effective as well. But there's no evidence yet. But I think it would be worth generate that evidence. More research is needed to improve the strength of the evidence of promising interventions such as remote teaching to the right level, online assessments, ALP, provision or incentives to use reading and learning materials. Social emotional programming show poor cost effectiveness on academic outcomes, given that the high cost and mixed impact, and because some of social emotional programs exhibited poor uptake and quality of implementation. In terms of recommendation for future research, we think it's very important to always pair impact evaluations with costing studies to assess cost effectiveness. That's really important because you can have an intervention that is impactful but prohibited cost, or vice versa, something that can be cheap but it has no impact. It's important, we recommend using implementation research to ensure that there's good uptake and good quality implementation of the interventions before assessing effectiveness, to prevent a lot of the information that we see where there's no impact, and so assess effectiveness only when implementation is good quality. And we find that there's need for more evidence on interventions for out-of-school children. So far, there's only rigorous evidence of impact for ALP programs. We find that it's important to conduct studies to assess the impact of interventions that are implemented at scale. The great majority of the interventions that we have reviewed are not implemented at scale, but they're just small programs. And also studies that assess long-term impact. We have other...
Thank you so much.
Thank you. There's meta-analysis coming up on access, social emotional learning, and early childhood education. So they're coming soon as well, and in a special issue that Eric is putting out. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sylvia. I know that was a lot of information to get through in a really short amount of time, so appreciate it. And really appreciate the engagement from the audience as well. We are noting your questions, and if the panelists are able to answer in real time, they will, and if not, we will answer all of them together towards the end, so please keep the questions coming. Without further ado, I will hand over to our next speaker, Dr. Caitlin Collis and Dr. Hassan from Luminous Fund.
Okay, thank you, Shreya. Can I be off the camera for connection purposes, please?
No worries, yes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hassan Ahmed from Luminous Fund, Ethiopia Country Office. Dr. Caitlin and I will present you with the work of Luminous Fund. I will give you a bit of introduction about Luminous Fund, and Dr. Caitlin will continue with the impact we've made so far. Next slide, please. Well, who is Luminous Fund? Luminous Fund was founded in 2016 to provide transformative education for out-of-school children, to help them to catch up to grade level, reintegrate into government school system, and also prepare for lifelong learning. As you can see from the map, we're working in these countries, and the biggest program is in Ethiopia. So far, we've reached more than 377,000 out-of-school children. Next slide, please. This is how Luminous Fund Accelerated Education Program is working. So the center of our work is joyful learning. It's our North Star. Then they will be transitioned to government schools after making sure that they have fulfilled the minimum learning competency at grade 3. So they will be moving after learning 1 year or 10 months, then they'll be transitioned to government school. So we are working very closely with the government of the different intervention countries to adopt a condensed form of our direct delivery model in their government adoption classes. So we have a very impactful and fruitful relationship and engagement with government counterparts in each country office. Next slide, please. So Luminous commissioned the University of Sussex and conducted a longitudinal study on the performance of students in our program from 2011 to 18. So the finding of the study showed that Luminous students complete primary school education 2 times the rate of other local students. And we also confirmed that our students are outperforming peers in maths and English by the average of 10%, as you can see from the figure. Next slide, please. Here, I will talk about our program in Tigray. As you may all know, after the war ends in Tigray, Luminous started education program in 5 districts in Tigray region. So the program has the following components. One is accelerated learning program with structured pedagogy model. And we have also school meal. We have social and emotional learning, including trauma healing. And also we have real-time data. So why school meal? Because as you all know, there have been war, drought, and shortage of food in the region in the past few years. Additionally, in our program, students have to stay 7 hours a day to complete a 10 months accelerated learning program. So they need to have some food at midday. And the social and emotional and trauma healing component. As you may understand, students, teachers, and parents have experienced some sort of trauma during the war. So they need to be healed from that experience. As you can see, no prior schooling when we conducted a study, that demography, you can see the demography of our students in Tigray in the slide. Next slide, please. As I tried to explain in the previous slide, our classrooms are joyful. So this is how students are learning. This is how a group of students are learning through music. So we call it students are in a group, organized in a group. So this is a music group where the students are attending classes. At the same time, it is a healing process. Next slide. Here, students are using flashcard to learn and also integrate the lesson they have been learning with practical activities. So this is also another way of students' engagement and activity-based learning. Next slide, please. Yeah, this also shows how the students are participating and also smiling when classes are running in the classroom. Next slide, please. So after 1 year intervention in Tigray, Luminous conducted a study with an external consultant to measure learning gains and the overall well-being of students in emergency setting. So the findings show that 94% of Luminous students in the Luminous program successfully transitioned into grade 4. And they also showed improvement in social and emotional skills. So there have been a reduction in post-trauma stress, there have been a reduction in hunger severity, and also there have been a reduction in behavioral difficulties that have been experienced in the past 3-4 years. Thank you so much. This is from my side. Now I will give the floor to Dr. Caitlin to continue with the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Hassan. If you could go to the next slide, please. So since 2017, an increasingly important dimension of the work Luminos does in Ethiopia, particularly from the standpoint of achieving impact at a lower cost per child, has been supporting the Ministry of Education to design and implement a government-owned accelerated learning program. So I've just seen a note that slides are not displayed. I'm seeing them on my screen, but I just want to flag that for the organizers. So like the Luminos direct delivery model, the government adoption model targets the most marginalized out-of-school children between the ages of 9 and 14. But the program is taught by government teachers and condenses core content from grades 1 and 2 in a 10-month program. And that's through a typical 4-hour government school day. In 2021, the Ministry of Education established a dedicated accelerated learning unit to coordinate the scale up of the program nationally. And today there are accelerated learning classes in government schools in all but one region of the country. Next slide, please. So everybody should hopefully see a slide with a graph on it showing reach numbers from 22 to 24. Okay, I'm seeing some yeses. Okay, so this collaborative venture with the Ethiopian government has significantly enhanced our ability to reach out of school children and to do so at a lower cost per child, since the government provides classroom space and assumes the cost of teacher salaries in the government adoption model. And a note on implementation, delivering accelerated education through government teachers has not been without its challenges. In the early years of the scale up, we received feedback from government teachers that they found lesson planning for accelerated learning classes to be more of a burden because they were expected to teach all grade 1 and 2 subjects, where most teachers in conventional schools in Ethiopia will specialize in a subject. So with that feedback in mind, in 2021, Luminos received a generous grant from the Gates Foundation to pilot interventions to enhance the scalability, impact, and teacher experience in the government accelerated learning model. Next slide, please. After carefully evaluating the standard model, Luminos proposed layering on a fit-for-purpose structured pedagogy approach that combines detailed daily lesson plans, 10 days of comprehensive teacher training, routine coaching, and robust classroom-level data. So in 23-24, we piloted this intervention in 40 government adoption classes in Sidama, Ethiopia, reaching 1,500 students. An external EGREGMA showed that students in this pilot received significantly higher learning gains in literacy and numeracy than students in standard government adoption classes and in the conventional school system in Sidama. Next slide, please. So the structured pedagogy model consists of structured daily lesson plans for each of the 4 core subjects. These are aligned with the regional curriculum, but embed evidence-based best practices for foundational literacy and numeracy instruction. They can be used in conjunction with government textbooks, but importantly can also function in isolation in low-resource classrooms. Teachers receive practical hands-on training on these materials, supplemental supervision, both of which are informed by routine classroom data. So we evaluated the impact of this intervention with an external EGREGMA in the last school year. Baseline was conducted in October 2023 and the end line in May 2024. And about 20% of the student population was sampled, and students were sampled from each of the 40 classes. Students assessed at baseline were identified and tracked and reassessed at end line. And then we also assessed, for comparison, students from 34 randomly selected standard government adoption models in the same districts. Now, these are the results of a small pilot, admittedly, but they're a very promising indicator of the impact of the model on student learning. So if we could go to the next slide. If we start by looking at the impact of the intervention on literacy, students in the structured pedagogy pilot progressed from reading 3 correct words per minute at baseline to 32 words per minute at end line, an improvement of 29 correct words per minute. And that was accompanied by improvements in comprehension as well, importantly. This is in stark contrast to students in standard government adoption models who saw an improvement of only about 6 correct words per minute from baseline to end line. And also students in kind of conventional grade 2 classrooms. The 2021 National EGRA saw grade 2 students in Sidama reading at about 7 words per minute on average. Next slide. When we compare these outcomes with those of other highly impactful programs, the impact of the structured pedagogy model remains impressive. Next slide. In terms of numeracy, students in the structured pedagogy classes were able to solve nearly twice as many addition operations per minute as those in standard government adoption classes. Next slide. Luminos has a really deep relationship with the government in Ethiopia, and so we've been able to leverage the results of this EGREGMA to now plan to scale structured pedagogy within the government adoption model to new regions and within Sidama. Next slide. So recognizing the significantly greater scale potential of the government adoption model, we're now preparing to scale this approach in Tigray, where more than 2 million children have been out of school for over 3 years due to the combination of COVID followed by civil war. So next slide, and this is my last one. Luminos is currently in the process of working with the Tigray REB to develop structured lesson plans, condensing the grade 1 and 2 regional curricula for Tigray. These will be rolled out to 150 government adoption classes next year, reaching more than 7,000 out-of-school children. We cannot scale the full kind of package of our direct delivery model through this government collaboration. We can scale the elements of the Sidama structured pedagogy pilot that have proven to be impactful, including detailed daily lesson plans aligned to the regional curricula, but infused with this joyful student-centered pedagogical practice to support social and emotional learning alongside foundational literacy and numeracy instruction. So stop there, but look forward to answering your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin and Hassan. And I will hand over to Dr. Jacqueline and Dr. Karen to take us through their EdTech evidence in refugee camps. Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Shreya. Hi, I'm Karen Levesque, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Jacqueline Mgumia. And we're going to talk about two studies done in two different refugee camps. Next slide, please. I'm only going to touch on key points, so we're happy to discuss further details later or provide further information after the webinar. So when we began our work about 7 years ago, there was a growing body of evidence that EdTech was among the most effective interventions in developing contexts. Since then, about 9 randomized controlled trials have been done on 1 billion software specifically, which we're going to talk about today. We work in both government schools and in refugee camps, and the two studies we have done in refugee camps are what we'll be talking about today. Next slide, please. So the two studies occurred in the Nyarugusu refugee camp located in Tanzania and the Dzaleka refugee camp in Malawi. It allowed us to fill in gaps in knowledge of the use of EdTech in refugee settings, and we had some specific questions for each of the studies. In Nyarugusu, we were able to look at whether EdTech could help avoid learning loss during the break between 2 school years. In Dzaleka, the question there was whether the software delivered in English would add value, learning value for children whose first language was not English. So 2 different study questions. Next slide, please. The theory of change is really very simple at its heart and illustrated by this image here. If we can get the high quality software on offline tablets into the hands of children, they will learn. Everything else is supporting or facilitating that magic moment of the child having time using the high quality learning software on the tablet. We offer the program as supplemental instruction, supplemental to whatever standard learning is going on in the school that the child has access to. The sessions are offered daily. The software offers a personalized learning experience for the child. During the sessions, adults play a facilitative role. And as I mentioned, the software is offline and the tablets are solar powered, solar charged. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more about the software itself. 1 Billion was a co-winner of the 2019 Global Learning X Prize. It teaches foundational literacy and numeracy in the language of instruction used in the school, in the standard classroom. So again, supplemental education, we try to match the language of instruction that the children are learning foundational literacy and numeracy in regular classrooms. There is a teacher avatar in the software who explains, talks, directs, encourages the children. These two studies use 2 different versions of the software. The most recent adaptive version of the software, which offers a short diagnostic assessment at the beginning of a session and then delivers material at the right level. The software used earlier in the Dzaleka study was a procedural version where children start at the same place but then proceed at their own pace through the curriculum. Next slide, please. So 2 RCTs, both involved about 300 learners who were randomly assigned to treatment and control groups within grade and gender strata. In both cases, they used the software daily. In Nyarugusu, it was during the school break for about 8 weeks, and in Dzaleka, it was during the school day for about 5 months. The control group continued with what the status quo was in their context. So in Nyarugusu, children in the control group had normal school break activities, and there were actually quite a number. We learned there were quite a number of academic related activities going on in Nyarugusu during the school break, particularly in literacy, but also in maths. In Zuleika, children continued, the control group continued with standard instruction only. Next slide, please. A couple of differences again between the two studies: the time, the duration, 8 weeks and 5 months. The Nyarugusu study, children used the software that in both foundational literacy and numeracy. In the Zuleika study, it was only maths that we studied. It was 1 hour a day in Nyarugusu, 20 minutes a day in Zuleika. Both populations were primarily Congolese children from the DRC. Similar grade levels, 1 to 3, and preschool 3 to grade 3 in Zuleika. Again, the dominant language at home was Kiswahili for all of these children. However, the language of instruction and the tablet instructional language differed. In Nyarugusu, both were Kiswahili. In Zuleika, both were English. And teaching in English in the regular classroom was the choice of the community in the school where we worked in Zuleika. Next slide, please. So here are our effect sizes from the camp study after 8 weeks. We had borderline statistically significant results on the left in literacy and highly significant results in mathematics on the right. Again, we found there were quite a number of literacy related activities going on in the camp during the break, which may have mitigated the literacy effects on the left. The blue bars are the intent to treat results, and the orange is treatment on the treated. Next slide, please. This is an older slide from the Zuleika study. The left is maths, the right is literacy. Again, it was only a mathematics software. So our primary focus were the impacts in mathematics learning, which is on the left. Both the intent to treat and treatment on the treated results were statistically significant. However, on the right, we also found a suggestion of spillover effects in literacy and English from using the mathematics program in English. Next slide, please. So as Sylvia mentioned, excuse me, cost depends on scale. The Malawian government 2.5 years ago determined to take this program nationwide in all of its government primary schools since last school year. So we have the opportunity in Malawi to take advantage of economies of scale, which then also apply to costs in the refugee camp that is within Malawi. So currently the costs in Malawi, we've gotten them down to, and they are still reducing, down to a total cost amortized over 20 years of $5.50 per child, over 10 years of about amortized over 10 years, about $9 per child. We then can apply these costs to the refugee camp that is within those borders. The Tanzania costs might end up being a little bit higher than this. It can be very country specific. Jackie may be able to speak more to that. I do want to mention that as this program scales nationally in Malawi, this coming school year, there will be an independent large-scale effectiveness RCT being done of this program, which is funded by the Gates the study is funded by the Gates Foundation and some others. And so we will have effectiveness evidence starting on end of next school year, which is very exciting. Next slide, please. I'm turning it over to Jackie to talk about the comprehensive qualitative results from our Tanzania study in the Nyarugusu refugee camp.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. So to speak about the feedback and findings that we got from our study in Nyarugusu, One is to highlight what it was reported to us to be key element for successful implementation. They commended the program because one, it removed the pressure within the school environment system by optimizing existing structures, by following flexible schedules that were actually existing in school, and the actual use of technology itself, it kind of surpassed the limitations of physical resources like textbooks and teaching stuff. So that was one element that seemed to be quite important. The second element, which was most liked, is the capacity of the program to foster local ownership within the community and the school system and the government, particularly the local leaders. And Imagine had a structure of which really look into sustaining these relationships in meaningful way. The second component was the cultural and contextual alignment within the school system. As Karen had mentioned, I remember at the beginning we had planned to use the tablets using French, but when we spoke with the school, they wanted Swahili to be used because of the refugee context, and we managed to change that. So that adaptation was found to be quite useful. And then the last component on that, we co-design schedules that work with the community, but also with parents getting feedback, what can work for children, for them to get this extra learning and schools. And so having that core design actually create ownership and parent supports and teacher support for children to participate. And the last element of that successful implementation is aligning with the community and context in general, in a sense that in refugee camp, due to the nature of how refugees are working, they were really looking into having additional material that is interactive and provide different sort of imagination and experiences for children. So having a tablet that allows children to learn out of constrained environment was quite useful, but also allowing the project to operate even during the holiday season instead of the school season, which was seemed to be short, seemed to be quite useful element. Participation of facilitators who are coming from the community itself seemed to be quite useful. So those seem to be three key elements that was useful from the beneficiary themselves. And then what we got, which was quite, I think, useful for us, was stakeholder perception. And this was coming from both the school management as well as parents. One was the essence of complementarian of the tablet program, because in refugee camp, they were not able to teach everything that was in the syllabus, and they didn't have the pedagogy that they actually needed. So having this tablet to surpass those limitations was seen to be quite useful. But second, it was also seen as a supplementary in a way because it helped to reinforce, since there was a lack of time of teachers, neither the resources to allow the children to learn on their own. So the tablet offered the supplement teaching that it was required. And then the second thing, they look at pop-up as a creative space because it allowed visual interactions. It created different sociality where children could get new friends. They could talk about this new content that they had found. They could sing together the common song that the tablet was providing to them. And lastly, it from the school management, it looked as it was a problem solving, not only the infrastructure limitation, but also the human resources of teachers at school. And it was also looked as a self-learning approach because most of the time and a constrained area, you are finding it's very difficult to motivate children to be self-independent, do activities on their own. So this approach actually of teaching, which is self-learning model, was highly liked by teacher and community and the children themselves, because they could find out that they're all capable of learning different things and solving different problems. And the last component was feedback from the children themselves. And for them, they gave us two things which were very important. One, they found pop-up to be a fun space where they could be creative, they could play around, they could also learn in that process. So they were always looking back to that. And they gave us feedback in terms of the content, animation, and all this material that we're in were found to be quite useful. And lastly, they give us a value of what they're saying tablet. It's nice because the content that within the tablet was found to provide rewards when they were doing well. It was not pushing for competitiveness, rather it was pushing for reward. Second, they found it to be friendly. Even when they were making a mistake, they were not punished for that. And lastly, they found it to be quite encouraging because they were encouraged to look for different options and solutions to the problem that they were actually starting. And that will be all from Imagine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen and Jacqueline. Really rich analysis from both of the interventions we've seen so far. And quickly, as I recognize we're running slightly behind schedule, I will hand over to Colin to take us through the evidence from the EdTech for continued learning in emergency or disruptive contexts. So over to you, Colin.
Thank you, Shreya. Should I share my screen here or will it pop up?
It should be able, we should be able to go to the next slide.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Awesome. Great. My name is Colin Crossley. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I am actually filling in for a colleague of mine, a partner from Uplift Afghanistan, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. So I'll do my best to channel her spirit. And essentially what I'll be presenting on is a project that we're currently running in Afghanistan, which is a collaboration between Youth Impact, which is where I work, providing technical assistance, the London School of Economics, providing research assistance, and a couple of implementing partners, including Uplift Afghanistan, that are delivering an exciting phone-based tutoring program, which we feel is going to help girls learn in the country. So we can move on to the next slide. Just a really quick overview. We've heard a lot about disrupted contexts on this in this webinar. This is just a demonstration of how often and how varied they are. And I think we all kind of have this one moment in mind around COVID where the need for EdTech solutions became extreme, but really there's a consistent number of students out of school each and every year for a variety of reasons, ranging from weather shocks to political conflict to gender-based exclusion to even things as simple as planned school holidays. So this question about what tools can we use to continue educating these students continues to be super important. Next slide. Our entry into the world of EdTech has come through low-tech platforms. I think one thing that we started early on thinking about was how can we reach as many students as possible without the risk of excluding vulnerable students or students at risk, or particularly low-income students who don't have access to some things like internet, especially if the goal is to reach students who are not able to enter into schools. So how do we get in contact with students at home when they can't be in their school community? You can see this chart here just really quickly summarizes, the access that low-income, middle-income, and upper-income households have to different types of technology. The bars in the red are households that own mobile phones, which you can see is consistently high across demographics versus things like internet. And so we selected basic mobile phones as our platform from which we wanted to begin developing out programming. Very cheap, widely accessible, and takes almost no upskilling for users to use them. Next slide. And so the program that we came up with is called ConnectEd, but essentially it's a targeted phone-based tutoring program. Very, very simple. Essentially what students receive over the course of a roughly 8-week period is once a week, a simple SMS that's sent to households with practice math problems or practice content that they can engage in outside of tutoring sessions. And then a short 20 to 30 minute tutoring phone call per week that's delivered by tutors to households where students and their caregivers together can engage in learning activities. So really only a 20 to 30 minute touch point each week for the course of 8 weeks per student. Next slide. In developing our curriculum and our approach, we drew on principles from Teaching at the Right Level, which is a targeted instructional program that's been proven to work in a number of RCTs in India and across the world. And so that's a core element here. And essentially what the phone-based tutoring program does is, once the students receive the SMS exercise, they receive the phone call, which provides targeted instruction, which means, for example, that if I'm found to have mastered addition, I'm able to solve math problems in a baseline survey, but I'm not able to solve subtraction problems. The targeted instruction tutoring calls focus for me on subtraction. At the end of each call, there's a learning checkpoint, which updates teachers on whether students have been able to master that one particular targeted topic. And then there's a scheduling of the next call. So effectively, the phone-based tutoring program is able to target individual skills for each individual student on a week-to-week basis. So it's a very highly targeted program. Next slide. When we rolled this out, there wasn't a lot of current evidence on what was going on during the pandemic, specifically for kind of targeted phone-based tutoring programs delivered over the phone. And so alongside developing this program, we ran a very large randomized control trial initiative, first in Botswana, where we found really great effects. And then we partnered with organizations in 5 countries to reach about 25,000 students to roll out a series of randomized control trials testing phone-based tutoring in different contexts. Those were in Kenya, Nepal, India, Uganda, and the Philippines. Next slide. And the results were extremely positive. So the effect sizes on average were about 0.3 standard deviations. And the program was extremely cheap, one of the more cost-effective approaches in education. And so all said and done, when government is supporting delivery, the program can reach children for as little as between $5 to $10 per child. Here you can see kind of our results in a graph. The red bars is the pooled learning across 5 countries, and you can see that the SMS messages by themselves don't really drive so much learning. Of course, a little bit here, but it's really the phone calls that we've learned, that human touch point that's extremely targeted between teachers and students, that makes the big difference. And then these green bars on the right actually show a comparison between phone calls when NGO facilitators deliver the program versus phone calls when government-employed teachers deliver the program. And you can see the effect sizes are about the same, if not slightly better, when governments deliver the program. So these results gave us a little bit of confidence that this could be something that's taken up by currently employed teachers or by systems to reach students in periods of disruptions. Next slide. Finally, I think we were delivering most of these studies during pandemic disruptions. However, there was one moment in the Philippines where we were able to run a quasi-experiment on how well the program worked during a different type of disruption. That was when a typhoon hit the Philippines, disrupted learning for 2 million children, destroyed 4,000 classrooms right in the middle of our RCT study. And we were able to see that students continued to receive the program relatively uninhibited, because usually cell network is one of the first things to be reconnected after a disaster like this. And they were actually able to continue learning during this disruption. So again, I think we began to view this particular program as a way to reach students in response to some of these rapid disruptions. Next slide. So that was a summary of the evidence for the program. What I'd really like to talk about here is how we are applying this in a context where there are ongoing disruptions. I think one of the most exciting initiatives we're running is a build-up to a randomized control trial and potential scale-up in Afghanistan. And this is where we're working with Uplift Afghanistan and other partners to deliver the program and adjust it for specific context. So we'll talk a little bit about how this is manifesting now in a very particular context in these next slides. Can go to the next one. So just a little bit of context. The Taliban has overtaken the government in August 2021. They've enforced a ban on girls above grade 6 attending secondary and higher education. That said, the young generation obviously is keen to continue learning. And one thing that's really important to note about Afghanistan is it's a very mountainous country. The infrastructure in some parts of the country are not great, and there remain restrictions on mobility, and there is uneven access to internet and regular electricity. And so the low-tech aspect of basic mobile phone tutoring is turning out to be quite important here as we deliver the program in the country. Next slide. So what does this mean? How are we taking this targeted tutoring approach and applying it to Afghanistan? We are essentially linking female teachers who also are no longer able to teach with some of their students who are no longer able to learn. And so essentially how we're doing this is selecting out tutors and teachers that have proven experience teaching in respective subjects. That means reading and math. They have to have an enthusiasm to participate in the program and, of course, have access to a functioning phone. We then ask those teachers to select some former students to enroll in the program, but we also enroll former students in alternative ways as well, mostly by reaching out to community centers for support. We'll talk a little bit about a key learning there in a slide or two here. The students that we're selecting need to be formally enrolled in regular school. They need to be excluded, or we prefer for them to be excluded because these are the girls that need programming and support the most. They need to have access to a functioning phone within the household. It doesn't matter who it belongs to. And there does need to be enthusiasm by the household head, which is the father or the mother, for the students to join the program. Next slide. So we ran some early pilots on this approach and found a couple of encouraging signs. Generally, our approach to rolling out programming in a new context, especially one as complicated as Afghanistan, is to establish a series of increasingly large pilots to master the, of course, delivery logistics of the program, but also to identify key challenges, risks, and areas that we need to tweak the context of how we're delivering the program. So this is a summary graph of the learning differences between baseline and endline in across our early pilots. You can see that learning is fairly well spread out. A lot of students here at this addition, subtraction, and multiplication levels. And at endline here, which is the green bar, we have many students mastering all skills, including some fraction and decimal content, which we qualify here as extra 1 and extra 2 at the end. So tons of learning that we're finding so far. All students who completed the program learned at least one new math operation, and the number of students who are able to answer all math operations correctly, so full mastery, increased by 29 percentage points over the course of the program. A couple of other important things to note. There was high demand here, so the request by parents and students to extend beyond the concluded pilot activities was common. And we did take great pains to make sure that the program remains safe. That meant working very closely with households and communities just to make sure that there was strong buy-in and we were kind of following established rules, not to put anyone at risk here. Next slide. This is just a couple of testimonials from caregivers. Again, they were extremely enthusiastic, especially for their girls to receive some type of educational support that we were able to provide. But I'll move through this for time. Next slide, please. Great. So just want to wrap up with final two slides here. One is just on some challenges that we've experienced in the delivery context of Afghanistan, which I think may have some wider implications for delivering programs like this in emergency contexts. And then I'll conclude with some next steps. So I've summarized here, I think, 4 main challenges that we found. The first is, can phone tutoring work equally well for slightly older demographics? As I mentioned before, normally we reach students in grades 3 through 4 with very basic foundational skills through this program. Here in Afghanistan, we're reaching girls that are at least in grade 6. And what we found actually is that provided that we find girls and beneficiaries who have fallen behind in their regular schooling, it doesn't actually matter how old they are. And in fact, sometimes older students are much better able to engage over the phone than younger students. So I think the age of the student doesn't change the need to reinforce some of the foundational skills that allow a basic understanding of reading and math. But it is an open question here, and we weren't quite sure about that when we entered into the program. Second question was, how do you enroll students who do not exist inside of the system? So girls are not allowed to be in public spaces or in schools. And so this obviously presented a challenge for us when we wanted to find some of the lower performing girls and young women to enroll in the program. There weren't any enrollment records that were recent that we could access within schools. And so here, I think, and in many emergency contexts where students are forced out of schools, this is likely to be an issue. And we spent a lot of time trying to find out what the community-based institutions were that we could access on an extremely local level to resource many of these phone numbers. And so this took a lot of collaboration with our implementing partners, with community organizations, a lot of streamlined communication there in order to actually reach and enroll households with girls that needed programming the most. Third question, how can programming be kept safe for beneficiaries? Again, I think this is just really strong communication and an emphasis on local partnerships. And then finally, we also, have kind of wondered, in this extremely tense context here, where there are a lot of open questions, how do you properly roll out good education programming? And I think our experience running pilots has shown that there's really a need to kind of slow walk programming as you kind of master it in order to fully reach and benefit students who need the programming here. So next and final slide. What are some next steps here? So in the coming months, we're going to run through a final round of piloting. This means a tune-up for delivery. It means finalizing some of our content, including perhaps introducing a literacy component of our curriculum, finalizing surveys, getting ready some monitoring dashboards. In August and November, we plan to launch and complete a randomized controlled trial study lasting 12 to 14 weeks. This includes an 8-week tutoring period, and we're going to study the impact on learning and mental emotional health. And ongoing, of course, is going to be an analysis of data and an effort to share implementation insights throughout the process. So we'd like to not wait until the end when we have data. We want to be able to kick these learnings out across networks, wherever it might be helpful. Thank you, Shreya. That's all I have. Happy to look at questions. And thanks again, everyone, for inviting us here to speak.
Thank you so much, Colin, and all of the presenters for an incredible job going through a really large amount of information in such a short time. I know somehow, despite having a 90-minute slot, we're still running behind. And I would like to quickly hand over to our discussant, Deborah, who will kind of help us summarize some of the main takeaways from these presentations, especially for us as a community of practitioners and policymakers. Thank you, Deborah. Over to you.
Great, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah Greben. Until recently, I was a senior evidence and learning advisor at the USAID Center for Education, focusing on evidence use. I want to thank INEE and our presenters today. This kind of research really couldn't be more important, especially now. Not only are there lots of contexts that are in crisis, but I would also say the global education funding landscape is also in crisis. We're in a moment where budgets are tightening and expectations are rising. And so we really need clear evidence on what works to improve foundational learning right now. So I think it's helpful to position all of the insights today within sort of the broader global evidence base, especially in the context of the 2023 GEEP report. So I'm sure many or most of you are aware of the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel, or GEEP, and their Smart Buys report, where they were categorizing different interventions based on their ability to reliably deliver strong results. What came up as really, top of the list in terms of great buys included structured pedagogy, which we've seen some of today with the Luminos Fund, as well as teaching at the right level. I know, Sylvia, you mentioned that, Tarl, we don't have great cost evidence right now in conflict and crisis settings, so that is a gap and a need. But I do think that we saw that one other thing that I think is a really interesting observation here, at least for me, is that there may be this elevated role of personalized and adaptive ed tech solutions. So in the GEEP report, the personalized digital learning was labeled as promising. But we've seen today that with Imagine Worldwide's interventions and others, that I think there's maybe an elevated status there, that it may indeed be kind of a smart buy. And I would also say there's additional evidence that's coming out of the World Bank around AI in a number of contexts that may be, this is something an area for us to watch closely. But we still have the caution, both with GEEP's report, with the ERIC study today, that technology alone is not enough. Effective ed tech needs to require thoughtful integration into pedagogical practice. It can't just be hardware distribution. And then I would also say that in terms of key takeaways, we have very strong evidence that interventions like tutoring, accelerated education, structured provision of teaching materials can really significantly boost foundational learning and numeracy skills. And this aligns really well with GEEP's established recommendations. But despite this strong impact evidence, we really still lack comprehensive cost data on a lot of this. So that is a key gap that we need to continue to look at and gather costing data and evidence. Second, we really see strong emerging evidence around these ed tech solutions, as I just mentioned, and that includes even simpler low-tech solutions like SMS and phone-based tutoring. So I think we should really be looking at those critical common elements around this, which really the common thread is active personalized learning, whether that's SMS or more personalized adaptive software. Third, I would also just mention that it's critical for us to remember that different interventions have been tested in varied crisis settings. So sometimes we're talking here about refugee camps, sometimes formal schools, sometimes informal learning centers. We're also talking about different types of crises that have been mentioned today. So internal displacement, active conflict, natural disasters. So I think implementers really need to carefully consider the specific features of the crisis in order to understand if an intervention is likely to succeed. And then I would also just mention too that there still remain these critical gaps. The need for more robust cost effectiveness data, where especially looking at those interventions that have been labeled as promising. I also want to just call out social emotional learning. And Sylvia, I'm going to pass this over to you in just a minute to talk about that particular piece of your work. But social emotional learning, which GEEP had labeled as promising, but obviously we have some different findings today to talk about. And then we also want to really, I think, better understand the long-term sustainability and equity considerations of many of these interventions. So who benefits, under what conditions, and how these interventions are implemented is really a critical point for us to consider here moving forward. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Sylvia. If you could talk specifically about a couple of your findings, one being around the social emotional learning and based on conflict and crisis settings, as well specifically for the outcomes. I want to make a differentiation here between the outcomes, social emotional learning outcomes versus the study, right? As well as if you could talk about teacher professional development as well, and the negative impacts that you saw around teacher professional development. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. In this particular, can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
In this particular presentation, we have conducted meta-analysis to look at the impact of education interventions on social emotional learning outcomes. That was not, and we will do a webinar on those. We haven't presented those findings. What I presented today looked instead at the impact that different education interventions, including social emotional learning programming, has on literacy and numeracy outcomes. What we have seen so far is that with regards to the impact of social emotional learning programming, and there's different types of programming that the studies included in the meta-analysis, there are different types. For example, there are comprehensive social emotional learning curriculums. There are instead as well, including transversally across different subject matters, use of social emotional learning specific activities. The programs have been used as part of tutoring programs, or as part of like in-school programs, school strengthening interventions. So there are different types. But what we see is that there's great variability in the impact of SEL programs on literacy and numeracy outcomes. I think the combined effect on literacy is on numeracy is positive, but on literacy is close to nothing. One of the things that that explains the lack of impact is that a lot of these programs have shown to have low uptake. When you look at the conditions of implementation, we're seeing that in conflict affected settings, many of these programs are actually too complex to implement. That as designed, the programs that have been implemented have been too complex to implement, and sometimes the materials are not around, or the populations that are implementing these programs don't fully understand this concept of social emotional learning because they haven't been fully designed in ways that they haven't been localized appropriately for the context of conflict and crisis, so that they would be fully aligned with the local values and needs, and being fully culturally appropriate, and sometimes with the materials that are needed for good implementation. And so we have seen low uptake of these programs, and as a result, sometimes low impact on literacy and numeracy outcomes. So basically, so far the recommendation in conflict and crisis settings, I mean, while the evidence shows that in stable settings, SEL programs are programming is promising, in conflict affected settings, it's important to ensure the new social emotional learning programs are fully localized in ways that will ensure high desirability, quality implementation, and that they are also implemented at a at a good cost, because the cost has been also high in ways that result in low cost effectiveness. And so this is important. But again, I also want to emphasize, because it came a lot in the questions, we will have an upcoming webinar to look at the impact of education interventions on social emotional learning outcomes. This was just impact of SEL programming on literacy and numeracy outcomes.
Great.
And
could
you
I
also had a
just-
question on teacher professional.
Yes. Can you take 30 seconds around teacher professional development? Thank you.
We're not seeing impact for face-to-face interventions. I think we are also, there's mixed impact on teacher and peer learning networks, and that's a lot that can be said. And the coaching also, coaching for teachers can be impactful. But the condition is that coaches really need to have good subject matter knowledge, and in the absence of good subject matter knowledge, it actually can have negative impact on actually literacy, numeracy, social emotional learning, and well-being outcomes of children. And so it's a condition for implementation of coaching programs that the coaches need to have good subject matter knowledge.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Then for our other presenters, I'm going to give you an impossible task since we only have 2 minutes left. I want to ask each of you, or at least one presenter, one person from each presentation team, to take 30 seconds to answer this question. So what do you see as the single biggest barrier to scaling these evidence-based interventions sustainably in conflict and crisis settings? And how could we best overcome that? So, impossible task. Who would like to go first?
I could try one thing. We've been looking at this ourselves, and when it's a government program, the government commits to paying for the recurring costs once the infrastructure has been set. We've had a pilot program run by Nadia Asmal, who I don't think was able to make it on the call, where we were looking at income generation programs in some of the refugee camps so that they could sustain the recurring costs themselves. And that's still in the pilot stages, but it was showing some promise there. So that was just one effort to help the communities themselves be able to sustain the recurring costs of the program.
Thank you.
I think for me, I think the challenge is when there's an emergency context and your normal institution through which you work is not available, such as the school system. I think it presents an interesting challenge to then figure out what is your mechanism for reaching people. And I think cost is one interesting factor, right? Like if the school system's not taking up the cost, then who is? I think for phone-based tutoring also, there is a distinction between, is this a remedial intervention that can bring people back up to grade level and give them foundational skills, or is it meant to be a program that's actually ongoing for long periods of time? I think some of those types of trade-offs might be at play if you're thinking about scale versus support and kind of how do we create an ecosystem of learning for some of these affected children.
Great, thank you.
I'm speaking for Luminos. I think when we talk about the government adoption accelerated learning program, this is a model that the government owns. It's taught by government teachers in government schools. And so when we think about scale in education and emergency settings, interruptions of one kind or another to the kind of daily operations of government schools can hinder the ability of the program to be executed successfully.
Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Shreya. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I mean, fantastic job facilitating the end of what was a very rushed series of presentations. Really grateful to you and to all of our presenters for being here today, sharing your insights. As we've noted, the webinar recording and the presentation will be available on the INEE website, and you should also feel free to contact us or any of the presenters for more detail with any questions about any of this research, and we'll be happy to come back to you with clarifications and answers. But hope that this was a useful and valuable start to discussing these questions in more detail, and looking forward to continuing this conversation, particularly as changes unfold around us. Thank you all so much for your attendance, your engagement. Really grateful to have this community, and a final thanks to all of the presenters today. Take care.